This week on Westworld.
You see that? That's how much longer you've got to be alive. And it isn't long, my pretty.
Multiple Calebs, a mole in our midst, and Hale getting even more unhinged. The third last episode of Westworld has come to an end, and I'm still pretty clueless as to what's going on. We're gonna get going and stick around till the end of the video where I go into my teaser trailer spoiler section with hints on where the show is headed. We open on a swing set. Whenever I think of sci-fi and swing sets, I always think of Terminator 2. This is actually a flashback to Hale's takeover of the world via the parasites. Frankie isn't that much older in this scene than when she escaped host Carver in episode 3, suggesting that Hale's takeover was extremely quick. This is at odds with what she said in episode 4 that it took a generation for her to gain complete control of the world. So maybe at this point she's only started taking over California where this seems to be set. Frankie and Uade have tracked down a young Jay who has started to remember thoughts of his brother. He'll be picked up as an outlier before being rescued. This is the first place we've seen other than New York and the 1920s park that is equipped with these audio transmitters. At the safe house, Frankie shows Jay how she uses the radio and a special frequency to send messages to her dad, but Jay thinks this is a waste of time. Her dad's gone, just like his brother. This becomes an important scene because it's here Jay tells Frankie not to call him her brother. Later in the episode, when Jay calls Frankie his family, she knows he's a host because the real Jay would never call her that. Frankie and Bernard have arrived at the abandoned 1920s park with the body of Maeve they found buried under the sand 2 episodes ago. If they're gonna get her back up and running, they'll need a few things that can only be found here. In the background here, you can make out the Madison Avenue type area with skyscrapers that we never really got to explore, and to the left, a hidden Easter egg of the Roman expansion, a callback to the original Westworld film. Interrupting a flashback of his daughter, Caleb wakes up to find himself imprisoned under Hale's control. She has this ominous red hourglass which seems to indicate how much time he has before his body decays. It's only a temporary body which will break down in a matter of days. Of course he wants to know where his daughter is, but Hale reminds him he's not the only one who has lost family, a nod to her family killed in season 3. Hale has kept Caleb because she believes he is somehow connected to her outlier problem, a problem which may or may not be related to her host choosing to stay mortal instead of transcend, a process we saw last episode. Hale also wants to know how Caleb disobeyed her order to kill Maeve those decades ago. It was Caleb, after all, who told Hale he has something she doesn't. We still don't know what this is, so Hale thinks all these things are connected, hence why she keeps Caleb around, hoping to get answers. Perhaps if Hale can capture Frankie, it will make Caleb talk. And it's here we get our first clue that within the rebels there's a mole. Hale tells him that a quote visitor is on their way. We see that Caleb's build is number 278, the same number she told him in the simulation from episode 4. Caleb will later find out his fellow prisoners are earlier versions of him. An apprehensive Frankie questions Bernard about his involvement with Westworld and Delos. She's still not sure what his grand plan is. They make their way underground in search of a new control unit. The one in Maeve's head would have been corrupted after spending decades buried in the sand. Ironically, the control unit they end up taking is that of Temperance Hector's. Hector was Maeve's love interest in Westworld and beyond. It's also kind of ironic that they awaken her in the Butterfly Club, the 1920s equivalent of the Mariposa where Maeve spent most of her life. Bernard says something really interesting here, that the original founders of Westworld started first with a simulation, and that Hale has done the same thing. Is this in any way connected to what's happening with Christina and the quote-unquote game she's been writing for? The original parks were used to collect data from their patrons. Westworld used hats to do this, but it seems the 1920s world had improved tech which utilized mirrors, tech that played off the most basic human impulse, vanity. The processor found in the back of this mirror will allow the data transfer from Maeve's old control unit into the new one much more quickly. Back in New York, Caleb is instructed by, well, Caleb, to inspect the hourglass where he'll find a device which pricks him and knocks him out. What he embarks on is a quest to escape and get a message to his daughter. However, this whole thing is a setup by Hale. Hale's been unsuccessful getting anything out of him. Hell, she's tried 278 times and failed, so maybe by giving him the illusion of hope she can keep tabs grabs on him and learns something that will solve her problems. When Caleb is knocked out, he experiences memories of his daughter, and also those of his wife at the hospital. It's heavily implied he met his wife here, who is a nurse, after the incident at the lighthouse. He awakens with a drone host starting the incineration process and escapes via a conveniently placed grate with an etched arrow pointing downward, something that was either planted there by Hale or a previous version of himself. Throughout his escape, he'll see several other of his clones who didn't make it, and I kept thinking to myself, how did Hale not know that there were all these dead bodies everywhere? But it doesn't really matter considering this was all her plan anyway. Bernard patches up Maeve with that same type of device that Caleb used to treat her gunshot wound in episode 3. We learn that Frankie's mom got sick, and it was Frankie who took care of her in her final days. Frankie is distrustful of Maeve, considering she was the last person she saw with her father the day he left. There's also a little talk about how she believes hosts can't have emotions and that their choices aren't their own. I wonder if this will change over the course of the next 2 episodes. Jay and Stubbs arrive back with the rescued outlier, where Jay tells the group there's a mole. This is how they were discovered while in New York. We'll later find out this mole is Jay, but Jay's human body was swapped with a host only after they were discovered. So is there another mole, or did the rebels just get unlucky? Frankie initially shoots Bernard, believing him to be the mold, after she discovered he was secretly copying her.
He's trying to copy all of us.
All Bernard says in response to this is that it's complicated and they need to trust him. Jay wants to destroy Maeve, but Frankie refuses, believing her to be the only thing that has info about her father. A series of bloody handprints lead Caleb along this path of his previous clones. He'll end up finding a small room of his exact same clothing, even copies of his wedding ring. After a drone host almost gets the better of him, he coughs up blood, indicating that his time is short. Because Bernard has been through this simulation thousands of times, he knows that the mole is one of Frankie's friends. In fact, the mole turned out to be completely different people in different simulations, so he can't pinpoint exactly who it is. Perhaps Bernard had Frankie analyzed to verify that she herself wasn't the mole. Regardless, he says that there wasn't a single version of the simulation where all of them make it out alive. Frankie will either have to kill one of them or they will kill her. Her paranoia has her lock up her girlfriend Odina, the fallout of which we'll likely see in the episodes to come. In one of the more outrageous moments of the show, Caleb uses a copy of himself to break his fall from the ventilation shaft. Talk about teamwork. He has another flashback, this one of teaching an injured Frankie that the person who can't be beat is the person that doesn't give up, echoing his own journey these past 23 years. This is a man who hasn't given up. Frankie uncovers that it's Jay who is the mole. He was switched while in New York. He tells her he doesn't want to kill her, and that may be because she's useful to Hale, and can be used as a bargaining chip against Caleb. Speaking of Caleb, he sends a message out to his daughter, who he refers to as Cookie. Maybe that's why she calls herself C. He apologizes for his failure as a father and not being there for her. He may have lost to Hale, but she still has a chance. It's a message that she'll hear only a brief portion of before Jay shoots the radio, but it's Maeve who saves Frankie by stabbing Jay in the head. For Maeve, it's time for her and Frankie to finish what Caleb started. Hale is frustrated. Caleb spent all this time escaping only to send what she calls a worthless message. Caleb tells her it wasn't the humans who infected the hosts, rather that the hosts would rather die than live in her world. This pisses her off, and she kills him. We'll later see her picking at her scar, something we saw her do last episode. Hale has all the Calebs incinerated. It kind of echoes what happened to James Delos Sr. in Season 2, when it looked like his quest for Fidelity would not be possible. Fidelity is the name of this episode and refers to the process of creating a human-host hybrid to see if they're true to the human they're supposed to represent. But Hale isn't giving up. We see that the 279th version of Caleb is already being made. The marking on the grate is covered up, perhaps hinting that Hale has to try a new approach. We see her visiting this new Caleb in a rather interesting position. It's the same one he was in while holding his gunshot wound in the simulation, suggesting this is Hale going through the same thing she did with the previous versions. He'll wake up, run away, and be brought back in. It seems the only way she'll get anything out of Caleb is if she finally catches Frankie, but to find out what happens, we'll need to wait for next episode. Up next is the teaser trailer section, where I go over some of the shots we haven't seen yet to see if there's anything we can can learn. I talked about this one last week, but this looks like Stubbs returning to New York, or at least some other populous city. We'll later see him at this abandoned drugstore where Clementine is. There's also this shot of what might be Caleb fighting Clementine. Remember that Clementine was tasked with dealing with Caleb. Honestly, if Hale really wanted to find Frankie, the best course of action would be to let him go and track him. Here's Dolores or Christina in some water. Not exactly sure what's going on here. William shoots someone, maybe it's Lawrence, maybe not. Bernard is shot, and this looks far more serious than how he was shot in this episode. Remember, he said there's no version of the story where he survives. A reflection of what may be Dolores Christina with the Abernathy Ranch. William arrives at the Hoover Dam where we see a big tear, similar to the one which led to the Sublime in season 2. William purchased all the data in those servers there, but hasn't been able to get at them because the files are encrypted. I've theorized that the real William may have switched places with Host William after Host William got infected, so it may be the real William who's chasing down Hale at the dam in this shot. Here's Maeve finally confronting Charlotte. Looks like she made it to New York, and is that the same knife that was used to kill Jay? I also found this weird looking bell that Charlotte holds. I wonder what that's for. This shot is super perplexing, where we can make out an early model of a Host exoskeleton. We've seen Dolores with this in the past. The man in black emerges from the body-filled streets of what might be California. Is this a flashback to when the flies started taking over, or is this something else entirely? Maybe he's hunting down the rebels. So that's pretty much it for this week. I can't believe we only have 2 more episodes and the Westworld saga comes to an end. I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing, as I'll be covering those as well. Thanks for watching, everyone, and for more bad takes, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ThinkStoryYT. Until next time, remember...
If there's anyone who doesn't know what Delos is, well, as we've always said, Delos is the vacation of the future today.